So I need to get this off my chest because what happened with my family over the past few weeks has been building for literally 7 years. And I finally pulled the trigger on something I've been planning since I was 22. Buckle up, because this is going to be a ride. Quick background, so you understand why my family treats me like garbage. My parents are Albert and Alicia, and my older brother is Felix. Felix is the golden child. Always has been. He went to business school, got his MBA, works at some consulting firm making six figures, drives a 2023 BMW, the whole package. Me? I dropped out of college after 2 years because I hated it and started working as a maintenance supervisor for a property management company. Not glamorous, I know, but my family acted like I had committed a federal crime by not getting a degree. For years, I heard it at every single family gathering. Albert would make comments about how Felix was going places while I was going nowhere. Alicia would sigh dramatically whenever someone asked what I did for work. Felix himself would make little jabs about how I should get my GED, which made no sense because I had a high school diploma. He just enjoyed being condescending. The worst part was none of them knew anything about my actual life because they never asked. They just assumed I was broke, stupid, and directionless. Okay, so we got Albert, Alicia, and Felix. Sounds like a family that names their Wi-Fi network the Prestige household and judges people by their LinkedIn headlines. And Felix out here telling his brother to get a GED when the man has a diploma? That's not even an insult. That's just being confidently wrong while being mean. That takes talent. That's like making fun of someone for not having legs while they're standing in front of you. The whole family built their identity around credentials, but apparently nobody taught them to read. Now here's where my grandmother Charlotte comes into the picture. She was my dad's mother, but she and Albert had a complicated relationship because she thought he was a snob who married into his ego. Charlotte actually liked me because I was the only one who visited her regularly, helped her with yard work, took her to doctor's appointments when she got older. Felix visited maybe twice a year for obligatory holiday photos. When Charlotte passed away 3 years ago, everyone assumed her small house and whatever savings she had would go to Albert since he was her only living child. But Charlotte had other plans. I'm not going to reveal everything yet because honestly this story is still unfolding. But let's just say Charlotte left me something significant in her will, and specifically stated that Albert was to receive nothing because, and I quote from her letter to me, "He only ever came around when he wanted something." My family doesn't know the full extent of what I inherited. They know Charlotte left me some money, which my parents dismissed as probably just a few $1,000s because they couldn't imagine Charlotte having anything substantial. They never asked me directly. They just made assumptions and kept treating me like the family disappointment. Charlotte. My girl Charlotte saw everything from that rocking chair. Elderly people be watching the whole family like it's their personal Netflix series. They know who's fake, who's real, who only shows up for the photo op, and she documented it in a legal letter. That woman wrote Albert's roast from beyond the grave and had it notarized. That's not petty. That's generational. Fast forward to 3 weeks ago. I had been living in a small apartment near my job, keeping to myself, building my life quietly. I went to my parents' house for what I thought was a normal Sunday dinner, and that's when Albert dropped the bomb. He sat me down in the living room with Alicia and Felix present and told me they had been discussing the family finances. Apparently, Felix's consulting firm had some layoffs, and while Felix kept his job, his bonus structure changed. Meanwhile, Albert's retirement investments hadn't performed well. Alicia's part-time job at a boutique wasn't covering what they needed. Then Albert said it. He told me it was time I contributed to this family instead of being a burden. He said they calculated that fair contribution from me would be $6,000 per month to help with the household expenses, mortgage, utilities, Felix's car payment since Felix was struggling, and general family needs. $6,000 per month from the son they've called a failure for 7 years. I asked him to repeat that number and he did, completely straight-faced, like this was a reasonable request. Alicia nodded along, saying it was the least I could do after everything they provided for me growing up. Felix sat there with this smug expression and added that if I couldn't afford it, maybe I should have listened to them about getting a real education and a real career. $72,000 a year. They want this man to pay more than most people's salary to subsidize Felix's BMW payments. They sat him down like an intervention, like he's the problem, then asked for 6 racks a month in the same breath as calling him a loser. The math isn't mathing. If he's such a failure, where exactly do they think this money is coming from? Do they think maintenance supervisors have a secret billionaire tier they just haven't unlocked? They're simultaneously saying you're worthless and give us everything you have, and somehow not hearing themselves. I stayed calm. I asked what would happen if I said no. Albert said then I would no longer be welcome at family gatherings, holidays, nothing. Alicia said she would have to reconsider what kind of son I really was. Felix laughed and called me a pathetic leech who would never amount to anything, said I was just proving their point by not stepping up. I stood up, told them I needed to think about it, and left. I drove back to my apartment and I was shaking, not from fear, but from anger. 7 years of being dismissed, mocked, treated like I was worthless. And now they wanted $6,000 a month from me while simultaneously telling me I was a failure. The next day, Alicia posted on Facebook. Someone from my high school sent me a screenshot because I had blocked my family on social media years ago. The post said she was ashamed to call me her son, that some children just turn out to be disappointments no matter how hard you try, and that she was grateful to at least have Felix who understood the meaning of family. 37 likes. Comments from relatives agreeing, saying some kids just don't turn out right. That post was the final confirmation I needed. I had been waiting for something like this, honestly. Not because I'm a pushover, but because I needed them to show their true colors completely before I made my move. I've been preparing for this moment for 3 years, ever since Charlotte passed, and I understood exactly what she had given me and why. I'm not going to say what I did yet because it's still playing out, but I will say this, I smiled when I saw that Facebook post. Not because it didn't hurt, but because they had just handed me the moral justification I needed to do what I've been planning to do. I'll update soon with what happened next because trust me, it gets so much better. Alicia took her humiliation to Facebook like it's 2012. Got 37 likes from relatives who probably haven't spoken to this kid since he was 12, but somehow felt qualified to agree he's a disappointment. That's the thing about family group chats and Facebook posts. People will pile on someone they don't even know just to stay in the inner circle. They're not agreeing because they think it's true. They're agreeing because they want to stay on Alicia's Christmas card list. And this man? This man screenshot it. He's collecting receipts like a forensic accountant. 3 years of silence. 3 years of letting them think they won. That's not patience, that's a siege. Update 1. Okay, so first of all, thank you to everyone who commented on my original post. Some of you were asking why I didn't just cut them off years ago, and honestly, that's a fair question. The answer is simple. Cutting them off would have been satisfying for about 5 minutes, and then they would have just continued living their lives thinking they were right about me. I didn't want to just disappear. I wanted them to know they were wrong. I wanted them to feel what I felt for 7 years. And for that, I needed to wait for the right moment. After I saw that Facebook post, I gave it 4 days. I let it sit. I let more relatives comment. I screenshot everything because I wanted receipts for later. Then, on Thursday evening, I drove back to my parents' house without any warning. Albert opened the door and looked surprised to see me. He immediately started in on how he hoped I had come to my senses and was ready to discuss the family contribution plan like a mature adult. I walked past him into the living room where Alicia was watching some home renovation show. Felix wasn't there yet, but I knew he would be because Thursday was the night he usually came over for dinner. I sat down and told Albert we needed to talk about Charlotte. The energy in the room shifted immediately. Alicia muted the TV. Albert sat down across from me and asked, "What about Charlotte? She passed 3 years ago. What could there possibly be to discuss now?" I told them I had been going through some of Charlotte's papers recently, and I found some interesting things. Albert's face tightened, and he said whatever I found was probably outdated or irrelevant, since he had already handled Charlotte's estate after she passed. That's when I asked him directly, "Did you handle her estate or did you just assume you knew what was in it?" Alicia jumped in saying, "Of course Albert handled it. He was Charlotte's only child. Everything went through him." I asked if that was true, then why did Charlotte's lawyer contact Emmy last month about some outstanding matters related to her property holdings? Albert went pale. Not dramatically like in a movie, just regular pale, like someone who realizes they might have made a mistake. He asked what property holdings I was talking about. I told him that's what I was trying to figure out, and I thought maybe he could help me understand since he claimed to have handled everything. Felix walked in right at that moment. He saw us sitting there tense and asked what was going on. Alicia told him we were discussing Charlotte's estate and that I was apparently claiming there were issues with how it was handled. Felix rolled his eyes and said, "Of course I was trying to stir up drama. That's what I always did, making problems where there were none because I couldn't stand seeing the family do well." I looked at Felix and asked him if he knew that Charlotte owned more than just her small house. He said everyone knew that. She had some savings and maybe a small investment account, nothing substantial. I asked him if he knew about the rental properties. Dead silence. Albert stood up and said he didn't know what game I was playing, but Charlotte didn't own any rental properties. She was a retired school teacher who lived modestly her whole life. I pulled out my phone and showed them a photo I had taken of one of the property deeds. Charlotte May Richardson, sole owner of a duplex on Meridian Street, purchased in 1987. There were others, but I wasn't ready to show them everything yet. Alicia's whole demeanor changed. She went from dismissive to suddenly very interested in having a calm family discussion. She said she didn't understand why Charlotte would have kept properties secret from Albert. Surely there must be some explanation. Maybe these were properties she sold years ago. I told her that's exactly what I was trying to figure out, which is why I had an appointment with Charlotte's lawyer, Harvey, next week. Felix started getting aggressive. He said I had no right to go digging around in Charlotte's estate, that Albert was her son, and any remaining assets should rightfully go to him and by extension to the family. I reminded Felix that I was also family. Or did he forget that between calling me a pathetic leech and agreeing with Mom's Facebook post about being ashamed of me? That caught them off guard. They didn't know I had seen the post. Alicia immediately started saying that post was taken out of context. She was frustrated and venting. She didn't mean it the way it sounded. I asked her how else someone could interpret being ashamed to call your own son your son. She had no answer for that. Albert tried to regain control of the conversation. He said whatever Charlotte had or didn't have wasn't the issue right now. The issue was that the family needed financial help, and I was apparently sitting on information that could benefit everyone. He said if Charlotte had properties, then those properties should help support her family, meaning them, meaning I should be working with them, not against them. I stood up to leave and told them I wasn't working against anyone. I was just trying to understand what Charlotte left behind and why she chose to leave it the way she did. I told them I would be back after I met with Harvey and maybe then we could have a more productive conversation. Felix followed me to the door and grabbed my arm. He told me not to do anything stupid, that whatever I thought I knew could affect the whole family's stability. I looked at his hand on my arm and asked him what exactly he meant by the family's stability. He let go and said I would find out soon enough if I kept pushing. On my way home, I couldn't stop thinking about what Felix said. Stability. Why would a few rental properties affect their stability? They had their own house. Felix had his consulting job. What wasn't I seeing? I'll update after I meet with Harvey. Something tells me that meeting is going to answer a lot of questions. I love how Alicia went from that post was taken out of context to dead silence in about 4 seconds. How do you take I'm ashamed of my son out of context? Was it opposite day? Were you hacked by someone who coincidentally knows your exact family dynamics? And Felix grabbing his arm talking about family stability, that's not a warning. That's a tell. That's a poker player sweating. Something is rotten, and Felix knows exactly what it is. Also notice how fast you have no right to dig into Charlotte's estate turned into those properties should help the family. The second they realized there was money involved, the entitlement switch flipped so fast it gave me whiplash. Update 2. Alright, so the meeting with Harvey happened and I have so much to tell you all. Some of you in the comments were speculating about what Charlotte might have left behind, and honestly, some of you were pretty close. Also, shout out to the person who told me to bring a notepad and not just rely on my memory, because that was solid advice. Harvey's office was in a small strip mall between a nail salon and a sandwich shop. Not exactly what I expected for an estate lawyer, but Charlotte always did things her own way. Harvey himself was probably in his 60s, been handling Charlotte's affairs for decades, and he remembered me from when I used to drive Charlotte to her appointments. He told me Charlotte talked about me a lot, especially in her last few years. She was proud of how I was building my life without my family's approval. We sat down and Harvey started going through the documents. Charlotte had been more financially savvy than anyone in our family knew. She had 4 properties total. The duplex on Meridian Street I already knew about. A small commercial building near downtown that she had been renting to a barbershop and a dry cleaner for over 20 years. A vacant lot on the edge of town that she bought in the 90s when land was cheap. And here's where it gets interesting. The 4th property was the house on Willow Creek Drive. I asked Harvey to repeat that because I wasn't sure I heard correctly. Willow Creek Drive. That's where my parents live. That's the house I grew up in. Harvey confirmed it. Charlotte bought that house in 1989 and allowed Albert to live there rent-free as a gift when he got married. The property was never transferred to Albert's name. It stayed in Charlotte's name the entire time, and now, according to her will, it belonged to me. My family has been living in my house for the past 3 years, and they had no idea. Harvey explained that Charlotte made this decision deliberately. She told him that Albert had become someone she didn't recognize, obsessed with appearances and status, treating his own children differently based on how they made him look to others. She watched how they treated me for years, and it broke her heart. The will was her way of trying to correct the balance after she was gone. I asked Harvey why none of this came up when Charlotte passed 3 years ago. He told me Charlotte had set up a delayed execution clause for certain assets. The rental properties and commercial building transferred to me immediately, but she wanted me to have time to get established before dealing with the house situation. She knew it would cause conflict, and she wanted me to be in a strong position when it happened. The clause expired last month, which is why Harvey reached out to me. Charlotte knew. She knew what would happen. She planned for it. Harvey gave me copies of all the deeds and the original will, with Charlotte's letter to me. I already had the letter, but seeing it again with full context of what she had done hit differently. She wrote that she hoped I would use these gifts wisely, and that she trusted me to do what was right even if it was difficult. I drove from Harvey's office straight to my parents' house. I know some of you will say I should have waited and planned more carefully, but I had been planning for 3 years. I was ready. Albert opened the door, and his face immediately went sour when he saw me. He asked if I was there to discuss contributing to the family or if I was going to keep playing games with Charlotte's estate. I walked in and told everyone to sit down because we needed to have a real conversation. Felix was there again, probably because they were expecting me to come by after the lawyer meeting. Alicia was sitting at the kitchen table with papers spread out in front of her. Looked like bills or financial statements. When I walked in, she quickly gathered them up. I sat across from them and told them I knew about the house. Albert asked what about the house. I told them I knew Charlotte never transferred ownership to them, that this house was part of her estate, and that it now belonged to me. Felix exploded. He started yelling about how I was lying, how there was no way this was true, how I must have forged documents or manipulated a senile old woman before she died. I pulled out the deed and placed it on the table. Charlotte May Richardson, 47 Willow Creek Drive, purchased 1989. Alicia started crying, not dramatically, just quiet tears while staring at the deed. She kept saying this couldn't be happening, that they had lived here for over 30 years, that this was their home. I told her I understood this was a shock, but this was the reality. Albert's approach was different. He tried to negotiate. He said, okay, fine, Charlotte made some unusual decisions, but we were still family, and we could work this out. He proposed that I sign the house over to them, and in exchange, they would forget about the $6,000 per month and welcome me back into the family with open arms. He said we could put all this unpleasantness behind us. I asked him if he was serious. After 7 years of treating me like garbage, after calling me a failure, after Felix calling me a leech, after that Facebook post, after demanding money from me while mocking my career, his solution was for me to just hand over a house worth several $100,000 and pretend none of it happened. Felix jumped in saying I owed them. He said they raised me, fed me, gave me a roof over my head for 18 years, and this was how I repaid them. I reminded Felix that parents are supposed to do those things. That's not a debt children owe. That's the bare minimum of being a parent. Alicia tried a different angle. She said Charlotte would never have wanted this to tear the family apart. She said Charlotte loved all of us and would be heartbroken to see us fighting. I told Alicia that Charlotte specifically wrote in her letter that Albert had become someone she didn't recognize and that she wanted me to have these properties because of how they treated me. That shut Alicia up. Albert stood up and said I needed to leave so they could process this as a family. I told him I would leave, but they needed to understand something. I wasn't making any decisions tonight, but they had 1 week to figure out their situation because after that I was going to start taking formal steps regarding my property. Felix followed me outside again. This time he wasn't aggressive. He looked scared. He told me quietly that I didn't understand the full picture, that things were worse than I knew, that if I did this I would be destroying them, not just inconveniencing them. I asked him what he meant. He said the consulting job layoffs he mentioned before. He didn't survive them. He had been fired 2 months ago and had been pretending to go to work every day while job hunting. Their parents didn't know. He had been burning through savings. So Felix the golden child had been unemployed for 2 months and lying about it. Interesting. He begged me to give him time to figure things out before I did anything drastic. I told him I would think about it. On my drive home, I realized something. They still didn't know about the rental income I had been collecting for 3 years from the other properties. They thought the house was all there was. They had no idea how prepared I actually was. I'll update soon. I have one more envelope to deliver. Charlotte had a delayed execution clause. This woman set up a timed revenge bomb. She said, let my grandson stack his bread for 3 years, then drop the nuke when he's ready. She planned this like a heist movie from the afterlife. And Albert really said, sign over the house and we'll welcome you back with open arms. Oh, now the arms are open? They've been closed for 7 years, but suddenly there's a property deed on the table and it's family reunion time? That's not reconciliation, that's a hostage negotiation where you're the hostage and they want you to pay the ransom. And Felix, Golden Child Felix, MBA Felix, BMW Felix. This man has been getting dressed every morning, kissing his parents goodbye and pretending to go to work for 2 months. He's been method acting as an employed person while his family mocks his brother for not having a real career. He called his brother a leech, while being the actual definition of a leech. The irony is so thick you could spread it on toast. Final update. Okay, this is the last update because I need to close this chapter. Thank you to everyone who followed along and especially those who shared similar stories about family members who only valued you when they needed something. So remember how I said I had one more envelope to deliver? Here's what happened. I spent the week preparing everything with Harvey. We drafted a formal lease agreement for 47 Willow Creek Drive. Market rate rent for that house was around $3,000 per month, but I set it at $2,000. The lease included a clause stating that failure to sign within 30 days would result in formal eviction proceedings. But that wasn't all in the envelope. I included a financial summary. 3 years of rental income from the duplex, commercial building, and vacant lot totaling over $200,000. I included bank statements showing my savings. I included a letter explaining that while they spent 7 years calling me a failure, I had quietly built wealth exceeding anything Felix achieved with his MBA. I included screenshots of Alicia's Facebook post. I included a timeline of every insult I remembered with dates. And I included Charlotte's original letter explaining why she left everything to me and nothing to Albert. I drove to their house at midnight Saturday. I placed the envelope on the doormat and drove home. My phone rang at 12:47 a.m. Albert. I let it ring 3 times before answering. Albert was screaming, demanding to know what I thought I was doing. How dare I threaten eviction? In the background, Alicia was hyperventilating. Then I heard a crash and Felix yelling before the line got muffled. I waited until Albert stopped screaming and told him calmly I wasn't threatening anyone. I was exercising my legal rights as property owner. I told him the terms were generous considering they lived rent-free in a house they never owned while treating the actual owner like garbage. Albert switched tactics. He said Charlotte must have been confused, that elderly people get manipulated by caretakers, that if I had decency I would honor what Charlotte really wanted. I told him her will was crystal clear and her letter explained everything. I told him I cared for Charlotte while he visited twice yearly for photos. 30 days to sign or find somewhere else. Felix grabbed the phone. He said I was burning bridges I could never rebuild. I told him he burned those bridges when he called me a pathetic leech. I told him I knew about his unemployment and maybe he should focus on finding a job instead of lecturing me. He went silent, asked how I knew. I told him it didn't matter. What mattered was the golden child who mocked my career was now jobless while the family disappointment owned 4 properties with more savings than Felix ever earned in a year. Alicia took the phone crying, asking why I was doing this. What had they done to deserve it? I listed everything. 7 years of being treated as lesser, comments about my education, sighs when people asked about my job, the demand for $6,000 monthly while calling me a failure, the Facebook post. I told her she asked what they did, and the answer was everything. She tried apologizing, said they made mistakes, were stressed about money. Felix losing his job put everyone on edge. I told her their version of family togetherness involved publicly humiliating me while demanding money. Albert got back on. Said fine, they would sign but wanted to negotiate. $2,000 was too high for family. I should reduce it or defer payments until Felix found work. I laughed. I told him 3 weeks ago he demanded $6,000 from me, the failure, and now he wanted a discount on rent already below market value. I told him terms were non-negotiable. $2,000 monthly, due on the 1st. No exceptions, no deferrals. Then I hung up. That was 5 days ago. 17 texts from relatives I hadn't heard from in years, encouraging me to be reasonable. Alicia sent a message about family being more important than money. Albert texted that he was consulting a lawyer about Charlotte's will validity. Good luck with that, they wanted $6,000 from me. Now they owe me $2,000. They called me a failure. Now I own their roof. They posted about being ashamed of me. Now everyone who saw that will watch them pay rent to their disappointment son or lose their home. Charlotte knew exactly what she was doing. She told me to do what was right even if difficult. And what's right is people facing consequences for how they treat others. For the first time in 7 years, I feel like I'm finally being treated how I deserve. Not as a leech, as a landlord.